Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. Earlier, a while back, the Tanstack team released a library or a framework called Tanstack Start. If you don't know what it is, basically it's a full stack framework that uses Tanstack Router for routing, and it supports the React and Solid libraries. Furthermore, as you can see here, it supports server-side rendering, streaming, server functions, and a lot more. Looking at this set of features, you might be confused about the differences between Start and Next.js. So to explain these differences, the Tanstack Start documentation has a little page or little article about these differences. And personally, for me, the biggest advantage of Start as compared to Next.js is that I can self-host my projects anywhere I want. Unlike Next.js, which is primarily hosted on Vercel's infrastructure, which at times can be very expensive. However, if being locked to Vercel's ecosystem is not much of a disadvantage for you, you can read ahead and maybe you guys can form your own opinion. Anyways, now that you know what Tanstack Start is and how it compares to other libraries, in this video you guys are going to learn how to get started with the Tanstack Start library. So let's get started. Okay, so here I am in VS Code. As you can see, I've built a dev container for this project. So to create a Tanstack Start project, what I'm going to do here is we have this command. I can use this command to get my project up and running. So then I just paste it like so and then enter. Let me just zoom in a bit. I think it's a bit hard to see for you guys. That's better. So the name of my project, let's call it Tanstack tutorial. And then my tool chain. So I want ESLint, so I press enter like so. And then would I like demo or example pages? Let's do no, since we're just getting started. And then any add-ons for my project. Since we're getting started, I don't need any add-ons. So to skip this, I just press enter. Would I like to initialize a Git repository? Yes, for sure. So that I can push this tutorial on GitHub. And then let's wait. Okay, so now that my project has been built, what I can do here is let's clean this. Let me close this as well. We don't need it today. And then I navigate to my Tanstack tutorial project. Anyways, let's now look through this project. So for example, within my src folder, we have this file called router.tsx. As stated earlier, for routing, this project uses Tanstack Router. This file contains our config for our router. And if you guys want to know more about Tanstack Router, you're welcome to check out the documentation. However, if you need me to create a tutorial, you can write that within the comment section below. Anyways, let's move on. And then more about routing. So within the routes folder, this is where our routes are, obviously. And then we have this file called __root.tsx. So basically, this is the root path of my project. And it covers all other routes as children. So this means that it's always rendered. I'll show you an example later on in this video. And then there are a few components I want you guys to know about. So scrolling down, we have this component called head content. This is basically here to render the head, the title, the meta, the link, and other head related tags within your component. Furthermore, we have Tanstack dev tools, which is the dev tools, obviously. And then scrolling down, we have scripts. So this is client-side JavaScript. So to run our project, I just go npm run dev. So now that my project is running, I'm on a dev container, so I would need to change a few settings. So for example, within vite.config.ts, I have to add a property here. So it's server. And then my port is 3000. I think we can leave this out. And then we have a host. So it's 127.0.0.1. That's it. So let's go back to the browser. Then 127.0.1 and then port 3000. Okay, great. So as you can see, we now have a project running. So let's go back to root.tsx. And since I said earlier that this component is the parent component of the whole page, so to speak, let's try to test something out. So for example, within my header here, let's add in h1 and then we can add some text here. So let's say, hi, this will be rendered everywhere. And then let's go back. So here, as you can see, this is now being rendered. And then if I go to about, so basically within both of these links here, as you can see, my component or my root.tsx component is being rendered. So basically, to keep it short, this file will be the parent component of your whole project. Anyways, let's move on. For the first part of this video, I want to cover routing. So when it comes to routing, there are two kinds of routing within Tanstack Start. So let's go back to the documentation here, and we have file-based routing, which is very similar to what we do in Next.js. So for example, we have a parent directory, and within that parent directory, we have multiple child directories. And then scrolling down, we have around here. So we have a parent directory followed by a dot and then our nested directory. And I'll show you both of these routing methods within my project here. So what we can do here is I create a new folder and then let's call it posts.tsx. So as you can see, we already have our boilerplate and it looks to me that's already set up. So let's go back to the browser here and let's do posts like so. So here, as you can see, we now have our component come up. So I want to create another route here. So let's use dot notation. So I want posts dot settings.tsx. So basically, if you don't know, this is for my posts / settings path. Anyways, so here we have the boilerplate already set up and I'm fine with this code. So let's go back and then post / settings. So even though we went to settings, notice that my settings text did not come up. And why is that, you might be wondering. So let's go back to the documentation, and if we scroll down around here, as you can see, our component tree would look something like this, where post is the parent component. So basically the root is the parent component, and then we have our child component. However, the problem is that within posts, we're not really rendering the child component. So to render the child component, here we can add a the outlet component like so. So basically very similar to what we're doing in React Router. And then let's go back. So here, as you can see, my /post, my /settings text is now coming up. So let's go back and let's now try directory-based routing. So I create a new folder, posts. So within posts, let's create a new file, and I want it to be a dynamic route. So for example, let's do $id.tsx. So here, my ID is a dynamic route. And then what we can do here is to get the parameter, I can just go const ID, and then it's equals route.useParams. And then here we can render the ID like so. So I go p ID and then ID. Whoops, that's it. Let's now go back and then post / and then an ID here. So our ID parameter. This time I'm going to use an ID of 1. So here, as you can see, my ID parameter is coming up. This means that this component is being rendered. We can also handle the post index route. To do so, I can create a new file and then let's call it index.tsx. And then my boilerplate is already set up. So I'll just add a comment here. So it handles the post path. So let's go back and see if it's being rendered. There's a bit of a conflict here. So I will add another text. So let's add something like, this is the root directory. Please go to another path. Let's go back. And now my code is being rendered. So that's great. You guys now learned about the fundamentals of routing within Tanstack. So let's move on to the second part of this video, which is about the execution model. So basically, this page says that all of our code within Tanstack is isomorphic. This means that my code or my components here will be rendered both on the server and the client. However, if we want, we can even configure the setting. So for example, we have code that can only be rendered on the server, and we have code that can only be rendered within the client. So some use cases for server-only code can be API calls or other utility functions, and use cases for client code can be browser utilities or browser APIs. So I'm going to start with using server-only. To demonstrate server-only, I want to use sample APIs. So I want to call an API for a server code, and then I want to use switch games, which is my favorite endpoint. Let me just copy this. And I want to render my switch games or the list of switch games within my index component. So to create a server component, here I can go const get API data equals and then create server fn, so server function, and then curly braces, and then we have a method get.handler. So how do we handle this server function? And this is the body of this function. So async, it will be an async function. What I can do here is const response await fetch. So I fetch from my API and then I paste it like so. And then at the end, I got the JSON and then return the JSON. So now I have to fix my imports. So I import from React Start. So this is wrong. So it's import createServerFn from React Start. So I have a linting error. Let's give it another line. And then let's now use this function. So to render some data, I'm going to create a useState. So it's a data useState. And then let's see what the types are being used here. So I run this and let's see what we get. Okay. So we have ID and let's use name. So ID is of type number. Whoops, it's number. And then we have a name of type string. And then it's an array like so. And the default value is going to be an empty array. So let's fix my code here. Looks like I need to import useState. And then let's fix this as well. So it's number like so. And then I'm going to create a use effect to use this get API data function equals and then comma and then an empty array. I don't want to use this code. So let's create a function. So const fetch data equals async, const data equals await get API data. And then I just set the data hook. That's it. So obviously within Tanstack Start, there's a better way to make an API call, and I'm going to show it to you later. But for now, let's use the React way, which is using states and use effects. And then let's now render this. So I'll just remove this here. And then I want to check if data exists. So data dot map, and then we have an item. So let's render a list like so. So li, and then item dot name, and then we have an ID as well. So key ID. Whoops, item.id, and then I need to render a UL element like so. Let's remove this and let's add it like here. That's it. So it looks like my code is not being formatted. That's because of a linter issue. So let's rename this variable, or it's better to rename this instead. So let's call it switch games list or switch games. Let's keep it short. And then I do set switch games like so, and then I change this function call switch games here. And now this looks way better. So let me now format this. So format document. Whoops, looks like I did not install the formatter within this dev container. So I'll install it in a minute. So it's prettier here. Okay, so now that prettier is working, it's now been saved. So let's go back to my browser here. And within posts, as you can see, now my list of switch games is being rendered. Okay, so let's move on. So instead of a list item, I can do a link. So to create a link, I just go link like so from React router key item.id to, and then we have this code here. And then let me add link like so. Like I got something wrong. So it's $ID, and then we have params. So the parameter, and then here it's ID to be item.id. Looks like it expects ID to be a string. So here I can go dot to string. That's it. Let's now test it out. So here, as you can see on the bottom left, looks like links are working. So let's click it. So as you can see, now my links are now working just fine. So now let's go back. And now let's go to id.tsx, where we can render the information about each switch game. So to do so, I create another server function. So here I can go get specific game equals createServerFn, and this time it's a get method once again. Dot handler, not handler, this time I want to add a validator. So I want to see if my ID is an integer. To do so, I go input validator, and we have an ID of type number, and it's going to return the ID like so. Dot handler. So let's fix my imports, otherwise my IDE is gonna keep on nagging. The handler async, and then to get a parameter here, I go curly bracket, data is renamed to ID like so, and then in curly bracket, and then basically what we were doing just like before, something very similar to this. So const response, and we have autocomplete helping us, and then we just return the JSON like so. And then let's use this function. So const game data set game data, And then let's see our schema. So within sample APIs, we have ID, name, genre, developers, publishers, and release dates. So let's use this. So we don't need ID. Let's use name, comma. I recall we have genre of type string. It's an array. And then comma, publisher, string, array once again, comma. What else do we have? Release date. Release date, it's a record of type string. So I don't want it to be null. It's just undefined for now. So just like before, let's create a use effect. And I don't want to really explain it once again. Let's just fetch the data and then render it. So I want this to be an empty array, and then let's render it like so. So if the data exists, not data, game data, if it exists, then I render the game data like so. So a div, and then I render the name, and then the genres, followed by the publishers, and then their release dates, like so. And then looks like we have an error. Let's see where it is. Around here. Oh yeah, that's because ID was a string. So let's fix it. So let's do parse int like so. Actually, let's make it a bit cleaner. So let's do const parsed ID equals parse int ID. And then to pass our ID, I use a curly bracket, and then data is parsed ID. That's it. Let's now run this code or test this code. Let me refresh my page here. Let's wait for the data to come up, and then let's click on any of them. So I click here, and here we have our data coming up. That's great to see. However, there's a problem here. Notice that whenever I refresh my page, I have to wait for a couple of seconds before the data has to come up onto the browser. So to improve user experience, how do we fix this? Well, thanks to Tanstack Start, we already have a fix for this. We can prefetch the data. To do so, here, let's scroll up, and let's use this function within our loader. To do so, within my createFileRoute function, I can go loader, and then async params equals, and then let's do the same here. So const id parse int params.id, like so. And then I want to use this function. So const game data equals await get specific game, and then I return the game data. That's it. So let's scroll down, and now let's get the data from this loader. To do so, here I can go const game data equals route, not router, route.use loader data, and we have a conflict here. Let me remove this. It's no longer necessary, and we don't need use effect either. This is because Tanstack Start is now prefetching our game data. And then, yeah, this seems fine for now. So let's go back to the browser, and let's wait for the response to come up. Looks like my response did not come up. Looks like I did something wrong. So let's see what I did wrong. So a while later, I found out my issue. Basically, game data should not be deconstructed. It's just a variable. And then here we have an error. Value is always falsy. So let's fix it. Looks like I need to set types here. So let's set a type. Let's scroll all the way up. And then here I can go type game data equals genre type string, name of type string. And then we have release dates, which is a record of type string. That's it. I think we have publishers as well. So let's add publishers too. Publishers. And then let's use this type. So I scroll down around here, and let's do promise game data. That's it. And now the types have been added. Looks like we still have an error. Let's see what's the problem. And we still have the same issue. Looks like it's better to just remove this condition altogether, like so. And testing this code out, as you can see, my data is still coming up. Let's refresh the page, and notice that this time whenever I refresh, I don't really have to wait for the data to come up. Here, in my opinion, that's the biggest advantage of Tanstack Start. The data is already cached, so users moving forward don't really have to wait for the data to come up on the browser. That was really instant. So let's now move on to the second part, which is createServerOnlyFn. So as the name suggests, this function is only for code that only has to be run on the server. If I try to render it or I run it on the client, I'm going to get an error. So I'm going to show it to you now. To demonstrate this behavior, I'm going to create a new file. Let's call it demo page. So I'm going to create a new endpoint. And then I'm going to create a function here. So const get env variable. So as the name suggests, I want an environment variable coming up. So create server only fn So within these brackets here, it's another bracket, so it's a callback. And then here I can go const env var equals process.env dot, let's call it secret underscore env underscore var. Actually, let's just return it like so. So return, and let's fix my imports. So from React start, and then let's create an environment variable. So new file.env. Whoops, looks like I messed up the spelling. 1n. And then here I can go secret underscore env underscore var equals secret. That's it. So let's go back to demo page and let's use this function. So here I can go loader and then a curly bracket, and then I just return the environment variable. So what I can do here is within my route component, let's do a console.log. So let's try calling this function, or let's try getting this data. So I get the environment variable from the route, and then I do a console.log. So if I refresh, or sorry, if I go to demo page, let's see what happens. So my environment variable is now coming up. That's because I only did a console.log. So within my console logs here, it's undefined. And let's see why. Okay, so I found out my error. That's because my .env file was not within the Tanstack tutorial project. So let's move it like so. And now my secret is coming up. Looks like it's now coming up within the client side as well. That's a bug, but let's try running this function within the client side. So to use this function within client side, I'm going to use a useEffect hook. So useEffect, if you don't know, only runs on the client side and does not run on the server side. So within useEffect here, I can just go const or console.log get env var, and let's remove this like so. And then let's go back. Let's refresh the code. So here, as you can see, we now have an error. The front end is telling us that the createServerOnly function can only be called on the server. That means that this createServerOnlyFn handler ensures that my functions only run on the server. That's great to see. So for my next part here, let's now perform client-only execution. So let's use this handler. So to demonstrate this, I'm going to use this function, which basically saves some data to local storage. So let me copy this and let's paste it here. And I'm going to change a few stuff here. So I don't want the key, I just want the value. And I want to hard code the key, or hard code the key. Let's call it name, and then the value like so. And then let's try to use this function. So since we know that this component is also being rendered on the server side, let's try to use this function here. And this means that this function will be running both on the client and the server. So we have an error. That's because of this code call. Let's remove this and let's go back, refresh the code. So nothing coming up on the front end. However, we have a problem within the back end. So let's scroll up, and here, as you can see, it says createClientOnlyFn functions can only be called on the client. So let's use this function properly. So I'm going to create a button, and let's do on click, and I go save to storage. The value, let's call it John, save name to John, and let's create another button, copy, paste, and let's do Jane here, save name to Jane, and let me just remove this. Let's go back. It does not look like a button, so let's add some styles here. So class name, whoops, let's give it BG blue 500. Let's give it some padding as well. Let me refresh. This looks fine, and let's copy this and put it here, and then let's go back, let's refresh. And for example, let's say if I click on this button, let's go to inspect element and then do a local storage. So here, as you can see, my name is now being saved as John. This means that our code worked. And let's click on this one, and within my console window, Jane is being saved. However, as you can see, we still have our error coming up. So let's try to fix this. One way we can fix it is we can use a tag called ClientOnly, which means that this code will only be run on the client. So I fix my imports like so, quick fix, React router, and then let's wrap it within these tags, and then let's refresh and let's scroll down. Hopefully we don't have any errors. So let me refresh again, and yeah, as you can see, our errors have now been solved. So now let's create another function to get the value within local storage. So here I can go const get from storage equals createClientOnlyFn, and then I return the value from local storage, and then I want to pass it to my loader. So let's remove this code and return get from storage. That's it. And then let's scroll down. Let's use our function. So let me rename this to current name, and let's use it here. So current name in storage is current name. That's it. Let's now refresh the code. Okay, so here as you can see, we still have an error. That's mainly because I ran this code outside of the client only tag. So let's put it here. So let's refresh and notice we still are getting the same error. So going back, that's because we have a loader, and that loader is running the get from storage function. So basically this still means that get from storage function is still running on the server. So in a minute here, I'm going to show you a simple fix where we can check the current running environment and then run the code depending on that environment. You'll know what I mean in just a second, but I'll just remove this like so. Then we can get the current name in storage like so. So get storage, get from storage. Let's refresh and we have the current name in storage. So anyways, let's now fix this. So what I would do here is I would remove this like so. And then we have a function called createIsomorphic Basically, this checks the current environment, and I'm going to show you in just a second. Dot server. So basically the code I want to run, if the environment is a server, and here I can go return no access from server dot client. So if the environment is a client, and then I return local storage dot get item name. Let me remove this, and now we can use this within our loader. So return get from storage. So let's scroll down, and this means that I can now use the current name variable like so. So here I go, current name. Let's now run it, and hopefully we should see what happens. So here it still says no access from the server. That's because the loader is also running on the server, and on the server it returns this response. So to fix it, here we can remove this call like so, and then let's do get from storage. That's it. And now let's go back and refresh the code. Here as you can see it says Jane. So let's go back to VS Code and let's do a little experiment. What if I remove this variable or this component from the client only tags? So let's move it up like so. Let's go back. Let's refresh. And here notice that whenever I refresh for a second here, it says no access from the server, and then it changes to Jane. This is what we call a hydration mismatch. Basically, this means that the server and the client have a different response. Another example of a hydration mismatch is when your server and the client are in different time zones. For example, if the server is located within Berlin and the user or the front end is in New York. So both of the server and the clients have different times or different data, so to speak. So we can fix this using a hook called useHydrated, and I'm going to show you too now. So useHydrated, sorry, it's const hydrated equals useHydrated, and then let's use it, hydrated. So basically I want to check if the server has successfully hydrated the client or successfully returned data to the client. So here I can go current name from loader, from loader current name, and if it has not hydrated, I can just go loading. That's it. Let's go back, let's refresh, and notice here this time it says loading, and then it gives us the correct data. And we still have this component here and it's confusing us, so I'll remove this here. We don't want repeating code. Anyways, I want to make it a bit more reactive. So to do so, I create another hook or another state called const name set name equals use state of type string, and I fix my imports. Let me put it down. Let me put it down for code quality. So then every time this on click is done, I also update the name variable. To do so, I wrap it in curly braces, and then here I can go set name to John, and then I do the same here. Set name to Jane. That's it. And then here I can add another paragraph. So value of loader, and here it's name, like so. So I want to get the value, so I want to set the name state as soon as it's mounted. To do so, here I can go set name get from storage. So get from storage can be null as well. So if it is null, I can do no name in storage. So let's go back, let's refresh the code, and here as you can see Jane comes up. Let's set it to John, and the value of the state changes. So to prevent confusion here, I'm just gonna comment out this code to prevent confusion again. So the value of name is Jane, and let's set it to John, and let's refresh, and it still should be John, Jane, and then refresh, still Jane. That's great. So that's it for today. In this video, you guys learned about the fundamentals of Tanstack Start. Furthermore, you also learned quite a bit about routing and isomorphic and server and client specific functions. If you guys have any questions or any feedback for me, let me know within the comment section below. Till then, bye bye and see you later.